Ryan Zarick, co-founder of LayerZero, known as Raz. What a beautiful nickname built right in. Welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. I know that you're calling in from home in Vancouver, and you have a newborn, so really appreciate you taking the time. Um, yeah, LayerZero. We're gonna dig a little bit, deeper into the mission and vision of what you guys are working on in this multi-chain world. But would love to hear kind of like the latest, greatest right now. Like what's hot on the griddle that you guys are cooking up in your magical kitchen.
Sure. We just finished we were expanding to our first non-EVM chain, which is Aptos, where we launched there. Tons of active users and transactions going there. We launched today was Avalanche, Avalanche's BTCB, which is their Bitcoin bridge, basically has an asset on Avalanche. Was in OFT, which we call an omni-chain fungible token, which basically allows that asset that's on Avalanche to move natively to all these other chains, including Aptos, so non-EVM, with zero bridging fees, and it actually being a native asset in those places. A few more of those are going to be coming out in the coming weeks of some major projects, as well as like now our main focus is building out tooling and expanding across EVM. So there's a lot of we were expanding really fast to begin with, and now there's a lot we want to do in terms of making developer experience just second to none. Right? It is already when you ask anybody who builds on LayerZero, it is an amazing experience, really easy to build on. It's developer centric, but there's tooling. It's never good enough for us, and so there's tons of tooling we want to add around that to make it so it's just easy to on-ramp, and beyond that, just the tools to be omni-chain.
Love it. OFT, omni-chain
Fungible token.
token. Like there's so many new acronyms and things to learn. That's one of my favorite things about being in Web3. It's just kind of like the staircase in Harry Potter. It's just as you think you know where you're going somewhere, it just kind of switches around. And let's dive a little bit deeper into what you've already built right now. But before we do, like, how do you navigate that? How do you prioritize? Like, if you think about it as a matrix of an interconnected matrix of all these chains and then their bridges and everything else, it's a fascinating puzzle to solve. That's these tectonic plates that are shifting in real time. Like what was the first step in your journey, and what have you guys built up to now to
So
bring our listeners up to speed?
LayerZero launched officially back in March when we started on 7 major EVM chains, and with that, crazily, people thought, and it was kind of crazy, 2 days after the launch of LayerZero, we launched Stargate, which is our native asset bridge. Most people spend like multiple all-nighters like we did to launch a single product like we did with LayerZero, and we did that.
Like all weekers. We're doing all monthers. Yes.
Yeah, basically, I never left the office for like a week, and then like, all right, in 2 days we're then launching Stargate, so we stayed through, and we launched a Stargate, which is the first product and first application built on LayerZero, which is a composable native asset bridge, meaning you move, say, USDC from one chain to another, and you're getting native USDC, not some wrapped version, which is something in general we're pretty against, because wrapped assets are essentially IOUs, and if there's a hack and smart contract bridge, which happens, you see monthly these days, people are left holding these IOUs that are worthless. And so we never liked that. And so that was the very concept of Stargate. And then what is cool beyond that on top of Stargate is that it's a composable bridge, meaning things can be built on top of it. So like imagine DEX that exists on 2 chains. They can go any asset to any asset in a single click, right? And they do that by swapping asset A to USDC, bridge USDC to the other side via Stargate, and then calling their own DEX on the other side in that single transaction to swap USDC to asset B, and essentially giving that one-click DEX, cross-chain DEX user experience, and things like that. Yield aggregation, lending and borrowing, everything, all of DeFi and then purchasing, right? Purchasing NFTs cross chain, things like that can be facilitated with LayerZero and then Stargate on top of it. And the vision there is that someday no one will ever think about Stargate or LayerZero because they're just built into the fabric of all of DeFi and crypto, right? Where no one wants to go to Stargate's website, Stargate.finance. They want to go to Uniswap or they want to go to SushiSwap or Pancake or whatever is wrapping it and use the one application to be able to move between chains.
Fascinating. First of all, great name, by the way, very evocative. I picture some sort of, kind of like laser giant circle or something with like Doctor Strange, just like breaking open the fabric of the multiverse to go across the other side. So that's a beautiful, like sort of seamless, elegant solution to get there. Definitely not that elegant or seamless to actually make that rift in the multiverse. Bring us a little deeper into that because, as you said before, of course, people want the chains to kind of go away. Like if I think about maybe in my non-technical background, like if I love to go to say 9gag to look at memes so that I can find a few to send to my teenage sons and communicate to them in some way. What cloud are they using? Are they on Azure? Are they on Google? Are they on AWS? Do they have their own, hosting? I don't know. Do I care? I don't care, right? And in the future, shouldn't an end user have kind of a similar experience where what chain is this whole magical experience being built on? I'm kind of, agnostic about it. I don't really care, but man, it's not easy to not necessarily care because you really have to care as a user. So it's such a big problem that you guys are addressing, but there's also this risk multiplier that every time you do another chain, another bridge, right? It's opening up all of these, maybe staying in that metaphor, all these other, Stranger Things, like you're opening a rift to the underside, and there's all kinds of horrible things that can happen. And tell our listeners about how you guys are addressing that.
Yeah. So LayerZero, we should think of it. LayerZero is like, the internet of blockchains. It allows arbitrary contract invocation, which means like basically smart contracts to communicate with each other directly without having to go through like a middle like chain or anything like that. Nothing that sits in the middle, right? It's direct chain to chain communication and those in your particular smart contracts communicating. And before I dive into that, like to kind of riff more on what you were saying, like, yeah, our long-term vision, I think the vision of LayerZero has always been the future of crypto. Like, this is not in the near term, but 5-10 years down the line is that you will use an application that's completely Web3 where you are accessing the actual site that's stored on IPFS or Arweave, right, the front end or whatever, and the the fast processing of, say, you're playing a game or something could be on a fast chain like Solana or a purpose-built chain. And then, the storage of assets that are, or financial assets are stored on a secure chain like Ethereum. And the user is interacting with all of these chains, but has no idea that they are, right? It's abstracted from them. Like you said, in the same way that when you build an application on Amazon Web Service, AWS, right? They could have a thing called S3 for storage, and they have like Lambdas for individual processes, and you can have dedicated servers, GPU servers for very fast processing of like crunching data or AI or anything like that. And but you don't, as a user, when you go to a website, you don't realize that you're like what portions of those services that you're using, it's abstracted from you, and that makes a better experience. And in the same way, you could use all of these different blockchains that have that are purpose built. Some blockchains are really fast, but they're making compromises on security or cost, and some are very secure but also expensive. Like there's no perfect solution, but you could use multiple blockchains to achieve a near perfect solution for user experience.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So I'd always thought of it, if you don't mind, like I thought of more multi-chain as, I'm a user that has a wallet on this chain, and I want to be able to uh, participate in this game using Solana or using uh, you know Sui or whatever chain. But you're talking about also there's another layer as well too, which is these chains are even behind the scenes and has nothing to do necessarily with the user's wallets, and it's really set up for um, enabling the game to be on chain, but either secure or fast or flexible. And like, there's a whole nother layer there. So I'm trying to divine things because I'm a, serial entrepreneur, but non-technical guy. And I'm trying to sort of channel, some of these, very complex ideas to other people who are also
Yeah.
have the kind of same lens as me. So that's a new insight for me. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then from the security standpoint, like where you're the more chains you connect does not mean even though it sounds scary, right? It's not mean you're exposing yourself to like exponentially more risk. The way LayerZero is built, unlike everything else in this space, is LayerZero is like what we call a true protocol. And like we kind of define things as protocols or services. And a service is something by our definition in the space is something that's is dependent on the creator company to secure and maintain whatever that service is, that messaging, that what you would define as a protocol. So that means, if a messaging layer or service is upgradable or it has a chain that's in the middle that, the parent company created, and if that parent company disappears, the whole messaging service just gets done, right? In the same, like if Wormhole disappeared or if, any of these, creating companies just went out of business, your messaging services is done. Like you have there's no way to continue it. And then also if that messaging service decides to be nefarious, right? If those owners, creators, want to attack the system, they could attack everything that's built on top of it because it is in fact a service. In fact, and just in the same way that AWS and Amazon could attack you, so could these third-party like messaging services, which makes them scary. And this is why you see these hacks happening. These hacks aren't happening because they've turned on their users, but they've happened because they have this power they shouldn't, which is the ability to upgrade their smart contracts or the ability or full control over the messaging layer between, which means they have these keys off-chain, which allow them to just, like you saw like with the Ronin hack or Harmony, where they can just, if those keys are compromised in any way, all messaging and all the assets on that using that bridge or messaging layer are compromised. And so LayerZero is built in a completely different way. It's built as a protocol. I designed it in a way where if I became evil and I wanted to attack my own protocol, I could not do that. And that's kind of like one of our main everything we build was with that in mind, that we can't do anything to anybody who builds on LayerZero. And that's a key part of what defines a protocol. If LayerZero Labs goes out of business tomorrow, LayerZero protocol can live on forever. It's built on chain and it is not dependent on us in any way. In the same way, if Vitalik disappears tomorrow, or if Vitalik wanted to be evil, he could not do something to Ethereum. We cannot do something to LayerZero. And so what we do, instead of putting the trust and the power and the control in our hands, is we put it in the hands of the applications that build on top of LayerZero. And so that means that they have control over the off-chain components, so they could select. So we have this concept. The way LayerZero kind of works, and I'm getting a little technical here, is
Please.
It is basically an oracle moves something called a block header, and then a relay or another component moves a transaction proof, and then validation happens at the destination chain. It moves this information. So what happens so I want to send a message from chain A to chain B. I send it to the LayerZero smart contract endpoint. And then based on what I'm an application, what my configuration is. So I pick my oracle and relay, and I tell them how many block confirmations to wait. They will send, after a certain amount of block confirmations, to the destination chain. One will send a block header, one will send a transaction proof. Validation will happen in the destination chain, and then the message will be received. Now, what's key here is that the user application, so that could be, if it's Stargate DAO decides this. If it's Uniswap, they would decide this, who their oracle and relay pairing are. And an oracle and relay pairing are kind of like the concepts and the names are misnomers because they could be anything. An oracle could be a single server, it could be Chainlink, it could be the validator set of Solana, and the same thing for a relay. And so the security can range, right? It's a configurable trustlessness is what we call it. And so the application chooses its Oracle and relayer pairing, and has that full control over that and their block confirmations, and we can't override that or change that on them. And so LayerZero Labs runs a relayer, but anybody could run a relayer. It's open and permissionless, and so anybody can also run an Oracle, and they can write their own implementations of what that Oracle and relayer are. And it makes it this open protocol that means that we're sharding risk, right? Because if a user application chooses chain link and relayer B, and another one chooses chain link and or say, I don't know, switchboard and relayer A, right? If one of those are compromised, or if a pairing is compromised, not everything that's on LayerZero is at risk. So it boils down to whatever the application sets as its risk parameters, because in the end, right, LayerZero it's not our assets when you're building on us that are at risk. It's yours. And so as the application developer, it's your NFTs, it's your tokens, it's your money, and you should be the one in control. That's our whole philosophy. That's completely different from every space, is that we want control in the hands of those applications.
Fascinating. Thanks for sharing. So, I've been an internet entrepreneur almost 25 plus years as Web 1, Web 2 smartphone, mostly in China. So kind of through osmosis, I've picked up enough tech stuff to be annoying to the tech team. But I've been, a keen student ever since I became entrepreneur in residence here in Animoca last year. And, one of the things you said, after a number of block confirmations, then you determine. So there is this trustlessness and, distributed nature, but there is this, sort of, for lack of a better, like wiggle room or fuzziness. Like how do you determine how many confirmations, and what's
Sure.
the.
So, you can do messaging security, and like risk is part of it, is block height or block confirmations. What that means is, there's a risk of reorg in any chain that doesn't have a finality gadget. And so, because of that, you want to wait, the longer you wait for finality. So whether it's like for Ethereum, I think it's 64 blocks now, that's a true finality gadget, where if you wait that long, it will be guaranteed that there's no chance that there will be a reorg and your transaction will have been dropped.
What does that translate into time typically? Can you say?
So 64, I think it's like 10 minutes, but it's a long time. You wouldn't want to wait that long, because statistically, right, I think after a few blocks, like 99% chance it'll never get reorged. I think we wait 12, which is like basically impossible. It's almost impossible to reorg now with proof of stake. So you don't need to wait the full 64. You could, if you want, if the more you wait, the more secure it'll be. But it's like diminishing returns and you're losing out on speed. So it depends what you're doing. So that block height is, we give that to the power of the user. We set defaults that we are very conservative. But they can override those and set whatever they want. So imagine, you're moving like 1 cent NFTs between chains, or like swords or something in a gaming chain. You're moving to another gaming chain. Like, speed may matter more to you than that like extra level of security. Because like if it got reorged and you lost a cent or something, or double spent a penny, it doesn't
you
really
mentioned
matter.
Solana. I think Solana is like 500 milliseconds or something like that, right? That they're doing their confirmations, and then so I mean, it's a huge orders and orders of magnitude off of 10 minutes, or even 12 blocks, which is probably just a few minutes. So
it's a couple minutes. So again, it's a couple minutes on Ethereum is what we have as default, but we're probably going to lower that in the near future. It hadn't really changed it since proof of work, which was at 12 then as well.
So fascinating. So one other thing I'd love to peel back on, which I just had this revelation, I, Robot by Isaac Asimov, where he's like, the first law of robotics, there's 3 laws of robotics. And I think you probably are, I'm certain, very familiar with that, is a robot may not injure a human being, or through inaction, allow a human being come to harm. And I think it seems like the way that you set up LayerZero, in that, its ability to be programmed in not to do evil. And then, of course, the second law is, you can obey the orders given to it by smart contract, by humans, except where such orders conflict with the first law. So it's really fascinating how, this kind of like, don't be evil with Google, but don't be evil with LayerZero, but it doesn't have to be dependent upon Larry and Sergey or whoever's running the show, or it's really baked into it. So that's the first time. Can you peel that back a little bit more about like how it's like, the smart contract? It's like sort of like a non-evil smart contract in a way,
So,
right?
it's funny you said that. So it's really hard, by the way, to build smart contracts with that in mind, right? It's so much easier to ship, and a lot of people ship with these upgradable smart contracts, because then, you have a problem or a bug, or you want to change something, you didn't think your design through. Well, I'll just go upgrade it and do it later. Now that's a lot of power. It means I have this Web 2 mentality where I can, move fast and break things, which is cool in Web 2 when you aren't dealing with money and other people's money. But here, or assets.
You're kind of breaking your own things instead of breaking everybody else's other things in a way, right?
Correct, right? Because you can't undo it. You can't take it back, right? Someone spent too much money on a video game and there's a bug in it, they can just roll it back. I can't, if something happens on LayerZero, and we didn't mean for it to happen, we can't go to Ethereum and say, please roll back the chain. It's not going to happen. So it's final. And so we wanted to, it's hard to build that way, but always from the beginning, we want something that we can, like, nobody, like a true, like, just like any smart contract, like a non-upgradable smart contract, the creator can't do evil to you, can't do anything bad, in a true protocol way, right? Because if you were to say, what's the security properties of LayerZero, or what's the security properties of other messaging protocols, right? If they're upgradable, it doesn't matter if they're using ZK technology for, verification, or if they're a roll up, or if they have, this middle chain with like consensus, right, with a bunch of nodes, right? It boils down to the weakest security link, and that weakest security link is the multisig of the contract that can upgrade. And if someone were to get a hold of the couple of the keys of that multisig, they can upgrade and steal all the funds and forge all the messaging for everybody, right? And it's an existential risk. And if LayerZero is going to be this internet of all of crypto, no one should have that power, right?
I feel like I'm getting smarter every second just by absorbing that. It's amazing. That really unlocks. I did a lot of research ahead of time around this, but I think that one thing helps me to really kind of grok what you embarked out to do. That's fascinating.
Yeah, we have this. So we get pushbacks from internal engineering. Is always like, can we just make this one thing upgradable, or can we just do this upgradable and we'll change it later, right? And it's always a hard. I have this. It's a company internal like motto. I always say, and it's Batman. Batman has one rule, right? He doesn't kill, and LayerZero doesn't upgrade smart contracts. That's our one rule.
Excellent.
I actually have a poster that I had made that I'm putting up in the office that says, Batman doesn't kill and LayerZero doesn't upgrade smart contracts.
That's great. One of my favorite memes is always be yourself. Always, always be yourself. Unless you can be Batman, then be Batman. I'm Raz from LayerZero and Batman. So that's great. If you say it in a Batman voice, it's even more serious. So that's fantastic. So in some ways you say upgradable, and that sounds, up and to the right, and, but what it really means is changeable, and so kind of like absolute power corrupts absolutely. So in some ways you put that restriction in there, and like that's kind of the core promise of blockchain, and really, having that the trust out there, and and I think so many people have been, believe in that, but they've been disappointed again and again and again, because there's that human factor in there that allows it to be corrupted.
Yeah. And a lot of people will argue and say, well, like the creators aren't going to attack. And right. It's to this day, I don't think anybody in the bridging creator side that we know of, at least, has performed an attack against themselves, but they've had the power to. And with that power, they've made a mistake.
That's so evil. I haven't even thought about it.
Well, they use that power to do something like, let's just make this new feature, and everybody gets all excited about it, and then they
blow it
forget
up.
to do something, or they have a bug in it, right?
Yeah.
And then someone hacks it, and like that's what happened with Nomad. Added some code. They didn't initialize something. They upgraded their smart contracts, and then everybody was able to forge messaging, and they stole almost $200 million from their bridge. And everything on top of it messaging could have been forged. It's a scary prospect, and you know, but that power doesn't belong in the hands of anybody that's doing infrastructure.
Yeah, it's well said, indeed. Wow, I love the Stargate name, but LayerZero, I think now I really understand like that name that you chose from the get-go is very apt, and you're really there as a kind of even deeper foundation for all the L1s, L2s, sidechains, everything else. I get it now. That's great. That's really enlightening. Let's go back to that origin story. I'm a fellow New Englander from Massachusetts. I'm a masshole from Greater Boston, and I know that you're from New Hampshire, and your two other founders are also from UNH, University of New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And you guys have been on quite a journey, leaving the hobbit hole in the Shire, New Hampshire, to go to Mordor multiple times. Tell us a little bit about that journey along the way and some lessons learned and how that informed your LayerZero journey.
Sure. So Brian was a year ahead of. So it was Brian, Caleb, and Brian was a year ahead of us. We're all computer science majors. So my freshman year, I picked UNH because they had this networking lab called the UNH IOL. It's like an IEEE conformance testing, which is like internet standards and all that stuff, like cutting edge stuff. So we were like doing 10 gigabit Ethernet, which is really like standard these days in backends, but it was like 15 years ago, right? So it's all the newest things that are coming out.
Screaming, yeah, wow.
And so I went and worked at this lab at the university, and that's where I met Brian and Caleb. We hit it off really early as friends, and I became roommates. Brian actually invited me to be a roommate with him. They're living off campus, and so I left the dorms and
there's no secrets. There's no right?
Yeah, we just became quick, best friends basically. Brian was a really sick developer at the time, and I used to kind of look up to him, and because he was a year ahead of me, so I don't know if you ever hear Brian speak, but he's very sharp.
Yes.
And I'd be seeing him do his homework assignments, the night before they'd do big hard coding assignments that everybody else is stuck on, and
just crushing it,
bang it out like a couple hours right before bed, and then go to bed and get an A in it, things like that, which was really fun to watch and kind of look up to. He eventually dropped out his senior year to become a poker player. I stayed on. Yeah, he dropped out senior year. He went to Budapest, met his wife there, and dropped out, became a professional poker player. I stayed with Caleb. We finished basically our degrees. I started my master's and PhD in computer science. The lab gave me was covering my tuition. Then we started our first company together out of school. Brian reached out. We wanted to do this, sports. It was daily fantasy sports, like DraftKings or FanDuel. We were one of the early ones and one of the biggest ones at the time, called BuzzDraft.
Model, yeah.
Yeah, it was a cool space. So we built that, sold that company a couple years later, and we've been building things ever since together, on and off. So most recently, I guess we've been building for 16 years together, just doing everything together. It's been a fun ride. Most recently, before LayerZero, we were doing some AI research, funding our own AI research that we were interested in. And, we ended up coming up with this solution between I guess there's like a academic feud between Carnegie Mellon and University of Alberta. University of Alberta team became part of Google DeepMind. Carnegie Mellon team, led by Noam Brown, which is he won science breakthrough of the year a year or two ago. Became part of Facebook AI research team, and we had
been thrown. That's pretty.
So they're going back and forth on this AI stuff, and we spent about a years on trying to solve some. We thought we could solve it, a faster and better version. And we came up with something that was 5,000 times more performant than Google DeepMind. So it could do the stuff they could do in like
What?
milliseconds. We
Wow.
published, we published
That's a
that.
side project. That's amazing. Like beating
Yeah.
Google orders of magnitude.
It was a fun it was really fun to do. We then published. We weren't going to publish it or anything. We just wanted to come up with the solution for that and apply it somewhere else in the space. But no, we met with Noam Brown and he's like, you got to publish this. So we worked with him. We published that. Got a lot of faith with him in Facebook AI research, and then Google DeepMind has cited it before. It was widely hailed as a breakthrough. So very cool to do that.
And what was that? Can you share without making
I can talk about it.
my headphones blow off my head when my brain explodes?
So we were making it's solving imperfect information games. So usually that's applied to is like poker. And so they were making different poker bots, basically AIs that could solve it, like perfect play to each other. And we were able to make one. Ours could solve a hand perfectly in like a couple 50 milliseconds or something. So it was just ungodly fast. And came up with a new algorithm to do it even faster and more efficiently. It's called DC Far Plus. And so that's what we did. We applied it to some robotics, the research to some robotics where we had a huge performance gain there for doing just trying to help some companies in the area. We were moving to automated cars where we wanted to apply some of our findings and performance gains because I'm really good at optimization. That's kind of my specialty, is optimizing things and really, like, that's how I got the 5,000x performance gain. I would say like 4,000x of the 5,000x was just pure optimizations that I'm able to perform on like GPU programming and all this stuff. And so we started looking into doing automated car routing and all of that stuff. But then DeFi summer started picking up. And so we started building arbitrage bots. We were like some of the best in the space at the time for DeFi. And we're really, like, I think like the second fastest before Flashbots came out. We built some on-trading strategies for hedge funds, but we really wanted to build something cool, some product. We wanted to build product again. We were looking for something to build. We just love crypto. And so we wanted to build something in the space. And then it was, I think it was March 2021. Yeah. When Binance Smart Chain had come out, which is now BNB Chain. And it actually gave Ethereum, like it showed that there's going to be a chain, an EVM chain that could compete against Ethereum, not beat it, but like actually get users and traction, right? It was like the first one that was showing that. And so we wanted to make a multi-chain application, like whether it was a game or a DeFi application, we weren't sure. We wanted to see. So I started investigating all the messaging or bridging layers out there. And there really wasn't messaging. It was mostly just, everything was bridging. And after looking at them all and looking at their tech and how it was all built, I decided that everything was super dangerous, super dicey. I would never build on any of them. And that the space needed some type of bridge or message, like something better. I'm like, so if I could, before I could even build a cross-chain application, I needed a messaging layer. I needed a bridge. I needed something. And one thing I liked was IBC's like light client concept. What they do is they run a full light client. So chain A and chain B want to communicate. Chain A has a light client of chain B and vice versa. And then you can move transaction proofs to verify against the light client and move messaging, essentially. Now, the problem with IBC is to do it that way with full light client verification, it would cost $50 to $100 million per day per pairwise chain just to keep the light client up, right, attached to Ethereum. So it only really works in Tendermint chains, not EVM. And so we were trying to figure out, I basically took Brian aside as I think I have a solution here. There's light clients. I think it's like an ultra light client or an ultra light node. And it's this idea. And so I said, I think I could build it like in a couple days. He laughed at me. He's like, all right, go ahead. And so I built this prototype of a bridge, which is the early cycles of Stargate. and it worked, right? It was this concept of an ultralight node where instead of doing every block header on stream, like having every single one being moved, we stream them on demand with an oracle. And that exponentially reduces the cost. So you still have similar security properties of a light client, and that there's these separated parties. One's doing a verification, and then there's verification on chain. So there's no middle chain in the middle. Verification happens at the destination chain. But now we've reduced the cost and made it actually viable.
Wow. And has that DNA stayed to this day? Is that
that is how.
Yeah, it seems like you sniffed it out early on pretty well.
Yeah, I shipped pretty fast. So then we were like, okay, let's make a bridge, and we just make it start. And I called it Stargate. We took I built the rest of Stargate out in that week, put it in audit, and we were gonna launch it that month. We were just like, let's just ship. It was like April.
Just get it out there. That's beautiful.
We weren't going to raise any money. We were just going for it. And at the time, so there's this bridging trilemma. And the bridging trilemma is I want to be able to move native assets. So I don't want wrapped assets. It is one of the things I want to do. I want instant guarantee of finality, meaning that when I bridge something, I don't want there to be a chance that the money's not there on the other side when I get there, like, because there's a race condition because someone else may have done it at a different chain and they took the money and now it reverts back and says, oh, an hour later, sorry, there was no money, right? That's a bad situation. So I want instant guarantee that I'm getting that money at the price that I was quoted. And then I want unified pools of liquidity, meaning, I don't want there to be a pairwise pool, like a pool just for Binance, and then a pool just for Avalanche, and a pool just for Optimism, right? Because that fragments liquidity and it's a very inefficient way of using funds, right? For like having individual pools. And so we solved only 2 at the time. Like, you can only use 2. You got to pick.
Yeah, because that third one is tough, right? That's like, you gotta.
Yeah, you always. So most people choose instant guarantee of finality, and what comes with it is that you don't have to have bullet pools liquidity, but you have wrapped assets instead that are not native. So that's what most bridges were doing. They're just wrapping. It's easy way out. But we're like, nobody, wrapped assets are dangerous. So we chose native assets, and we chose instant guarantee of finality, with this thing that no one had to come up with, which is a precursor to what we did with Stargate. So we had this way of basically keeping track of each other's balances, each chain pairwise, where chain A knows the balance of chain B and vice versa, and they own that. And so because of that, we were able to solve 2 of the 3. And that was what we put in audit. And at the time, it seemed fine because it was just BNB chain and Ethereum and nobody else that was really competitive at the time. And so we're like, oh, pairwise doesn't matter. But, months in the coming months, there was like tons more chains that were getting traction besides BNB chain. So it wasn't going to work very well. But we didn't know that at the time. So we put this in audit, and I was talking with Brian, and I said, this bridge is cool, but what's more interesting is, we have these layer 1s and layer 2s. And like it's more, that's what you call, like, the layer 2s are on top of the layer 1s. And what's more interesting is that this underlying messaging layer, right, of Stargate. And it's kind of like this LayerZero of crypto. And when I said that, Brian's like, that's a great name.
Yeah.
We need to raise and start a company on that.
I think it's okay to say it's a great fucking name, because it really is.
Yeah. Brian doesn't swear, but I do. And yeah, he's like, he says, that's a great name, and we have to raise money. And so on that, and raise a company. And so we pulled it out of audit. I wrote Stargate. I wrote all of LayerZero in a single day, and we started raising. So I just sat, it was like a single session. I think it was like over 30 hours or something. I sat and just didn't stop typing.
That's like Silicon Valley, the HBO show. Like it does happen sometimes. Like that you can actually have this sort of eureka, and then it really maybe it's kind of like Jack Dorsey in a way of like, okay, we're gonna do this many characters are allowed in a text, and I'm gonna do this sort of one to many, and here we go, and just ship it, right? And it kind of sticks.
One of our early investors whenever he comes by, he knows the commit hash of that first commit, and he writes it on my desk because he wants to make it a thing, because he calls it the immaculate commit, right?
The immaculate commit, right? It's sort of things of legend, but wow, the immaculate commit. We should make an NFT of just that. That hash. That's amazing. Love it.
And
What a terrific origin story. Keep going, please.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, so we built it before we even raised. We picked, and then we picked like 6 funds that we really wanted to raise with, that had close proximity to DeFi and layer 1s and layer 2s. Got 5 of the 6, and then picked up the last one in the next round. And so we raised with like a Binance multi-coin lead. And then we raised at 50 million. Then we raised another one at $1 billion after that. And during that time, we hadn't launched yet, because we were raising and doing all that, process of like trying to solve this other problem, which is during that time, all these chains started popping up, and the Stargate bridge that we were going to put on LayerZero after the fact did not solve this bridging trilemma. And so I, basically Brian has this thing ever since we were in our first company. Brian's always like, and it's our company motto. We say it all the time. Better is better. Where he just is like, basically means we want the best outcome. We ship the best thing possible. There's no compromise. And so I kept telling Brian, it's not possible to solve this. We have to make trade-offs. We can't, if we don't want wrapped assets, there's basically no way to achieve like solving this trilemma. And he said like figure it out. He didn't think we'd figure it out. And so I spent a couple days just like staring at a wall trying to figure out what to do. And my co-founder Caleb kept coming like, dude, are you gonna type? Are you gonna do anything? And then it kind of just came to me, where
another eureka on top of the eureka. Yeah. So please, I feel like I should be eating popcorn right now. Tell me what happened. So do not cut off and say to be continued. That's cruel.
So that's where we came up with the Delta algorithm, which is what Stargate is built on top of, which solves the bridging trouble. I started writing out a demonstration of it as just in a text file, as a single text file. I wrote the rules for it, wrote the demonstration, a walkthrough, and Caleb was late at night, and he's just watching me at the door, just staring. My wife comes in, and he's like, no, don't bother him. He's in his zone. And I immediately after I finished typing, I'm just like furiously typing it for like an hour of these, because I had to walk through and prove it would work, right? I had to make sure that I had actually solved it, because it seemed really hard to solve and impossible. I call Brian up, I walk him through it, and he was like, holy shit, we did it.
I feel like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting, like writing on the chalkboard in the hallway, and the professor's like, hey, come back here. And that's amazing. So that rule set, can you share what the parameters were of that you then based everything?
The Delta algorithm essentially achieves this global pool, I guess, like unified pool of liquidity, where someone can put money in. And what happens is the Delta algorithm automatically rebalances based on chains that need it. So it's reallocating funds on the fly. And it has the same parameter, the original algorithm we had come up with, where I own your balance and you own my balance, but I don't know what my balance is. You know my balance. Basically, the collective other chains know my balance, but I don't know it. And I plus the other chains collective know your balance, but you don't know it. And it has this auto balancing mechanism that has stood the test of time. If you look at Stargate today, it's the most widely used bridge, let's be honest, by all metrics at this point. And, it has this capital efficiency, where there's this unified pool of liquidity where I put money in to provide liquidity, and I am getting fees from all chains that are coming there, because they're all sharing that pool of liquidity. And then from a user experience with this Delta, I get that instant guarantee of finality. So I know how much I'm going to get on the destination chain. And I have these native asset pools. And so it's everything I want. It's like your cake, and you have your cake and get to eat it too, kind of deal. And with that, because we achieve all of that, we're composable as well, which I've talked about earlier, which is like anything can build on top of it. Which was a real game changer in the space. Was why we blew Stargate. It was the fastest growing DeFi project of all time. We had 4.5 billion in TVL in the first 2 weeks, which is no crypto project has done that before, or since. And we had to lower emissions because we didn't need that much. Stargate only needs a couple $100 million in assets to be very efficient. So we had way more than we needed, and we actually didn't get voting up in time to lower emissions. So we had all of this TVL in the first 2 weeks on a brand new messaging protocol, which we felt super confident about, but like still it's scary, right? Just having that
Sure.
billions of dollars in the first week. We're like, we don't need this. So we eventually got the vote through where we could lower the emissions. And then now we have it at a spot where we actually are very efficient and not overpaying for liquidity that we're not using.
Terrific. Wow. Are you a poker player yourself as well?
No, I'm terrible at poker.
No. Terrible poker.
Like I'm okay, but I'm nowhere near. Brian's world class. He was like one of the best heads up poker players when he was playing in the world, when he was actually playing full time. He's incredible at that.
Because you told that story before about using, with that AI project. And, I think there is, happens to be a connection between poker players. I think like, Chamath from Social Capital and Sam Altman from YC. And I think even, the late Tony Hsieh from Zappos, but, that's sort of like game theory. But I was hoping that you were going to say, yes, I'm a really deep, deep in the weeds poker player, like Brian. And like, that's how you were able to, just have a poker face and think your way through. But I guess in some ways, really being able to load that in your RAM and just give yourself the time to process it internally, like
My favorite thing is
that's a
solving
great
impossible
skill.
problems. Basically, if someone says you can't do something or something can't be done, I think Brian does that on purpose to me sometimes to try to get me to solve problems.
I mean, is that old movie, the Iger Sanction, with Clint Eastwood, and the guy says, "Oh yeah, I climbed that last week." And Clint Eastwood is like, "But nobody's ever been able to climb that." He goes, "Yeah, I did it." And then he trains for weeks and weeks and weeks, and eats these big meals, and finally summits it. And then he comes down, and the guy says, "Yeah, congratulations for being the first to the top." And he
Yeah,
goes, "I'm the
exactly.
second." And he goes, "No, I never climbed it. I,
Yeah,
I said, I dare you." And
that's what drives me
that
for sure.
worked.
It
Wow.
really, we did the same thing with the poker AI part. We were in a spot where we just couldn't solve like something really hard. It was just impossible, right? It was a reason why no one had achieved what we'd achieved. It was considered really hard and impossible to do. Some of these like solutions that we had to come up with, like what we had achieved, like graphics programming is pretty like new and kind of not that new, but new relative to all other programming things. And hard new paradigm, a way to how you think about how to program. Most people program things like linearly with these like steps that you go through, and you could thread things out. But like with graphics programming, and like everything's serial, everything's at the same time, and you're trying to use all of these processors at the exact same time, so they can't communicate with each other, and they all have to do a bunch of work. And then and anytime you spend syncing, communicating, you're wasting time throughput. You're
Oh,
wasting because they have to come off the computer. You have to do whatever you want to the data and then put it back on and do it. So most graphics programming is batching like that. It's on and off, on and off. And I achieved basically like 99% throughput. I was basically never not computing. That's how with the algorithms and things that I had come up with. So it was like on the GPU, never come off the GPU till it solved the whole poker problem, come off. And there was almost no syncing at all. And so
so that's how you're able to get those 5,000%
yeah,
increase,
exactly.
just
Where
because
you just
you're
can't,
just staying right in the GPU.
which is
Interesting.
like really hard to do the whole process, right? And there were algorithms we had to solve that we thought were like impossible and spent like months just banging our heads against it. And I just love those impossible problems. They're my favorite thing to do.
What I've learned in many years of being an entrepreneur and being an investor advisor is that a lot of startups die from suicide rather than murder, meaning there's some kind of founder conflict, or they're unable to move ahead. You guys have had many quests over this almost 2 decades. Can you share some of the learnings, or maybe some mistakes you made along the way, for some people that are maybe on their first or second quest, so that they can kind of get off the GPU and kind of sync with you, and then go back in and process, but process in the right way. If I may use that clunky metaphor, probably not the right one, but you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
absolutely. Sure. So one of the, I guess, so from my own learnings, things that I kind of learned quickly, which may not be, it's more of a mentality, is that people kind of put a lot of people on like in general, like celebrities and really like really good famous entrepreneurs as well on pedestals, and they say like these guys are amazing and they're special and
Heroes.
they have, they're a superhero. They have something that I don't. And they put people with these credentials who are, worked at Google or they did something or whatever on their, have sick resumes. I went to MIT or some Ivy League school, and those people are special and better than you, right?
I could never do that.
Yeah. But people aren't as good as you think they are. And one thing I've always learned, I've kind of realized, and I'm constantly always feel like I'm being shown this, people suck. They're not that good. And you have to, right? Like even the people with the sick resumes and everything, they're not as good as they look like they are humans. And they think they are. Everybody's
humans,
human, right?
Yeah.
And winning and killing it and like doing and being successful, is not only, it's a mixture of like how hard you work. You got to want it more than anybody. You got to work your ass off and you got to be able to make a lot of sacrifices, but also what your mental pain tolerance is, right? Brian and I and Caleb have been in spots where it feels like we're not going to make it, right? As pre-LayerZero, other things we've done. And it feels like funds are running out. We're eating through our savings, and like most people in those situations when their wives are like, please get a job. Like, they do, right? They break. They say, you know what? I tap out.
And understandably so.
Yeah,
for
sure. And the difference between a person who succeeds in these situations and the ones that tap out are pain tolerance. They're willing to say, I don't care. I will live in my parents' basement. I will like get rid of all my assets because I believe in what I'm building and what I'm doing more than anything else. And I will go to zero and beyond zero to do it and suffer all the personal consequences that come with that. And it's kind of you have to be kind of crazy to want to do that, but you have to.
You have to be kind of fringe, right? It's like the most likely outcome is failure, and it's kind of miserable along the way. But I often say like, but other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln? Right? So it's like and you have to really, really want it and be able to eat bitter. So and you guys have looked at your background like, wow, these guys have just crushed it. But behind the scenes, behind the curtain, it's not pretty.
Yeah, I mean, we've pushed through a lot of pain over the 16 years, and sometimes you don't win, right? Even though you push through everything and you do it right, and you still just don't win because you didn't have. You built the product and you built everything, but people didn't want it, or you built, you did everything technologically good enough, but you weren't skilled enough at raising or whatever. You didn't have something.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just luck, right? It's just timing or whatever, right? Out of your control.
Even if you do have what it takes to push through it, if you fail, can you do it again? And can you do it again and again? And I would tell my wife, I will keep doing this entrepreneurial thing and startups forever. It's not going to stop. And if she was like, well, what happens if we fail at this? And I say, well, then I will start another thing. I will continue to build and follow my dreams of my ideas and what I'm going to build. And like nothing will stop me. And if I do this for the rest of my life and I'm never successful, I'll still be happy that I kept doing what I wanted to do.
Wow. What a beautiful partnership that is. She's on board, and that makes a big difference. You have to have that mentality between the ear holes in the right place, but also the right kind of external, support as well too. But I think I'm going to go out a little bit out on a limb here and say that you're probably on the right path right now. You have been in the past, and I'm really excited to see future, what the future brings for LayerZero and your team. And I think it's an incredible contribution to the ecosystem. And I think a lot of other companies in the Animoca ecosystem can benefit and partner with what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Ryan Zarick, Raz, co-founder of LayerZero, ladies and gentlemen, as advertised. That was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is for information purposes only and should not be considered as financial advice. Any opinions provided in this podcast reflect the views of the speakers only.